from NHCSR here. I'm going to start sticking these field reports into the Serious Grower feed during the growing season to give you some real-time reports from our extension specialists in New England, New York, and the Mid-Atlantic states, sometimes our friends to the north. Because one of the very best things about being in this field is how much my colleagues love to connect and share information. I'm very, truly blessed. Find photos on our Instagram at Serious Grower and look for links to resources from extension educators in your region in the show notes. Pay close attention to where some of these reports are coming from because we'll be covering a very wide region, and reach out if you need help connecting with your local extension specialist wherever you are. We will get you hooked up with the right expert in your area. So we're going to start out with the most time-sensitive reports from what folks are seeing out on commercial vegetable farms, then some more deep dives and recommendations to summarize some of the most common issues folks are talking about this year. I will take care to specify when I'm talking about tunnel-grown crops, otherwise assume I'm talking about open culture. Okay, top line reports for June 10th, 2026. Corn earworm moths have been flying in the mid-Atlantic states for several weeks now, and we are hearing reports of first capture of corn earworm and European corn borer moths in northern states like New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Maine. Cucumber beetles are really on the move into squash, cucumbers, and other cucurbic crops. Alternaria leaf spot has been confirmed in cucumber, and I'm assuming that isn't a tunnel cucumber. Colorado potato beetle adults have been moving into potato and eggplant across the region. It sounds like the mid-Atlantic states are already seeing young larvae, and northern states are just starting to see egg laying. Alternaria has been confirmed in tomato in the region, as well as leaf mold in tomato in tunnels. So tomato leaf mold is one of these diseases that we almost never see causing problems in outdoor culture, but it can cause yield loss in tunnels. We're not sure why this is. We have a few speculations, and I don't have great science-based advice on thresholds or best management practices. I'm very sorry. Other than to encourage better humidity management, which includes pruning and maybe some active ventilation practices in the tunnel. For folks in areas impacted by allium leaf miner or folks in areas impacted by leek moth, we happen to be in a lull for adult activity for both species. So we're experiencing reduced risk for new infestations, but folks might start noticing larvae now that are indications of infestations that were laid a few weeks ago. This time of year might also be a good time to assess garlic diseases. Many of you may have recently pulled away mulch or are making assessments after a very extreme spring where we have experienced a lot of rapid shifts between freezing temperatures and hot temperatures. Those rapid shifts may have led to more fissures in plant tissue that may have provided entry points for the more ubiquitous pathogens that maybe have not caused you historic problems in the past, but might cause you problems this year. We're thinking like fusarium and botrytis leaf blights. I'm including a few resources that might be helpful for you if you're brushing up on your onion blights and lesions, your stemphiliums, your purple blotches. So check it out. And also remember the disease triangle. A susceptible crop and a suitable environment are required for infections in addition to the presence of the pathogen. So a lot of the times you have these ubiquitous pathogens, but your crop isn't susceptible or the environment isn't conducive to it. However, there are some pathogens that are more problematic than others on their own. A couple of those that have come up in our conversations this week. White rot infections in garlic have been confirmed in Pennsylvania, New York, and Nova Scotia. I'm including a resource from Crystal Stewart and Frank Hay in the show notes on identifying this disease. But make sure to get a confirmation of this pathogen, Sclerotium septivorum, with your local plant diagnostic lab, because this pathogen can persist in your soil for decades and cause you all sorts of problems down the road. So a reminder to always seek disease-free seed garlic. Here's a quote from that resource. White rot damage is generally detected first as yellowing or wilting of the foliage just prior to scape emergence, though the infestation started much earlier. The above ground symptoms can correspond with underground symptoms, including degradation of the roots and basal plate, formation of black sclerotia the size of poppy seeds, and briefly a white mycelial mat on the bulb extending up to the soil line. So that could be a sign that you have some trouble coming. Reach out if you need confirmation. Botrytis neck rot is another standout and should be distinguished from botrytis leaf blights, as they are caused by different species of botrytis and attack different parts of the plant. The botrytis pathogen that causes leaf blight is pretty common, but the botrytis pathogen that causes neck rot is more rare, so taking extra care to acquire disease-free seed is also important to preventing issues like this in your garlic. Folks typically wouldn't see signs of botrytis neck rot until after harvest during the curing process. However, there has been at least one confirmed case of botrytis neck rot in the region recently, which is unexpected and could be an indication of persistent issues in affected fields. I put a link in the show notes to a resource from UMass. Here's a quote from that resource. Sunken, water-soaked tissue around the neck. The tissue decays and a thick gray mold develops between onion scales, often producing small, hard, black resting bodies called sclerotia. Sclerotia. Ruining our lives. All right, so for another deep dive, we've been hearing from several folks around the region with unusual white grub situations in vegetable crops. And I say unusual because we typically only think of these scarab beetles in association with grasses, with turf, with pastures. But we've been seeing many more infestations following drought years where irrigated vegetables, look pretty good for thirsty adult beetles looking for a place to lay their eggs. So in general, we kind of assume the problem will go away because the next year, those white grubs will come up to the soil surface, emerge as adults, and leave to seek out grass hosts. However, it sounds like more folks are finding persistent soil-borne grub problems in their vegetables, specifically in lettuces, and they're looking for solutions. So let's talk about entomopathogenic nematodes or beneficial nematodes. If you are looking for an inundative approach to biological control of soil-dwelling pests, you have many, many options to purchase these animals, and it can get a little overwhelming. So I'll do my best to summarize best practices, and do keep in mind that the biocontrol industry is kind of built around the container growing greenhouse industry. So there's a part of that culture that accepts higher costs associated with frequent applications of biocontrol. It is very normal for those systems to put these animals out there, sending their soldiers out to die in hopes that somebody will be there if a pest shows up in a very sterile environment. That's very different from some of the soil-dwelling pests that we're talking about. However, there is very good data in support of efficacy of these same products for control of soil-dwelling pests like grubs and lawns, as well as part of a thrips resistance management program in tunnel soils, as long as you take extra steps to apply with plenty of water. So in greenhouse systems, those applications are done with a sprinch application. That is a charming portmanteau of spray and drench, so that gives you an idea of how much water we're talking about. There's many sprinkler irrigation systems that do a great job of delivering these beneficial nematodes to soils. It sounds like those hose attachments that people use for home fertilization seem to be really great if you're working with smaller spaces. Another important thing is to avoid UV exposure by applying in the evening if you can do it. In terms of costs, this can sting a bit, particularly since overnight shipping is an absolute requirement. So a package of 50 million nematodes, I know that sounds funny, but that's the unit we're talking about. One package will cover a standard tunnel if you're targeting pests that are just active in the soil surface. And that will run you about $20 to $30 for the product plus overnight shipping. If you're trying to target pest insects that live deeper in the ground, like the white grubs we're talking about, they will move up and down in the soil column throughout the year. You will need to increase that rate to at least double and really drench that area to get that beneficial nematode down deeper where your irrigation water brings it. You can also purchase 1.5 billion nematodes. So if you're thinking about getting many, many packages of 50 million entomopathogenic nematodes, you can also scale up and get 1.5 billion nematodes, which will cover an acre, and that will run you something like $200 to $300 plus pretty much the same cost for overnight shipping. If you have that kind of space to cover or several tunnels to treat, that might be something to totally think about splurging on if it comes in a big loaf. Another thing you could think about is that you can use like half of them as soon as you get them and stick them in the fridge to reapply the following weeks. As long as you keep them in that cool fridge temperature, these animals stay sleepy, they don't expend themselves, and they do stay viable for up to 2 weeks. I have done some trials myself and I feel pretty confident about this claim. Aside from soil moisture and UV exposure during application, the greatest source of failure happens in shipping. I've never seen much variation in quality between the major suppliers. They're all pretty great. And it does get a little confusing because there are multiple suppliers that all sell similar products from multiple producers, and the product will ship directly to you from the producer. So there's going to be different rules about when you have to get your order in by, when the product is shipped. I mean, best advice, just go with the supplier that has a schedule that fits your schedule, so you know somebody will be there to receive the package. That being said, you can go online to Arbico or doityourself.com. I don't know what it's called. You can buy the Sternanemia feltii, the Sternanemia carpocapsia. Those are the two that kind of stay at the soil surface or as deep as your irrigation water delivers them. And then you have your Heterabditis. They're more likely to seek out prey items beyond where that irrigation delivers them. They're more likely to be associated with deep-dwelling species like the white grubs. However, I do think it is worth it to go with a biocontrol supplier like IPM Labs with Griffin or BioLine Agrosciences. I personally have had issues with shipping communication with those online suppliers. So if you're already getting supplies from any of these folks, it's kind of a no-brainer to get your beneficial nematodes from them too, but it's worth it to talk to a person to make sure you're not making any common mistakes, and you can usually get a better price if you're buying more than 50 million nematodes at a pop. I put links in the show notes to IPM Labs and Griffin, who offer products from Beneficial Insectary and BASF. BioLine Agrosciences carries their own product. It comes in a gel-based carrier. This is a little bit different. I don't think there's any difference between the traditional carriers and the gel-based carriers, but BioLine is more likely to offer next-day shipping, and they have also just shifted to a paper shipping container instead of the foam coolers that these products are typically shipped in. So these are little details that you should consider. If you are not necessarily looking for a right-now solution and are more interested in establishing a persistent population of beneficial nematodes over larger areas over longer time periods, I'm including instructions from the Shields lab at Cornell University on how to grow your own beneficial nematodes. And you can also find some more information on how to acquire locally adapted beneficial nematodes that may be more likely to survive northern climates to overwinter over multiple years. I also found that Elson Shields from the Shields lab, he and his son and some other entomologists have started a company called Persistent Biocontrol, and that's very interesting for people who are covering very large areas. I think they're providing some support for people in field crops out in the corn belt of the country. So that's interesting. But know that buying them from a biocontrol supplier is a right now inundative approach. Growing it yourself, getting persistent nematodes, that's for a long-term, multiple year, much larger area approach. All right. That's enough deep dive for now. Let me know what you'd like to hear more about, and thank you so much for listening.